Having been a Chinese immigrant living in the United States for more than 10 years, it's really hard to describe myself. Never a native, but no longer a stranger. This state of being leads to my interest of a group of contemporary artists from China, and they're called the 1.5 generation. The public first saw the visual representation of 8 1.5 artists of various ethnicities in New York in 2007 at the Queens Museum of Art's exhibition Generation 1.5. To this day, this is the only major institutional display of 1.5 generation, the social group. And how is this group formed? The concept of 1.5 generation was first coined in 1969 by the Cuban-American sociologist Ruben Rumbaud, describing as young immigrants who were born in Cuba but grew up in the US to embody two cultures. This concept was quickly expanded beyond Cuban-American and further explored in immigration and culture studies. In my project, I extend the 1.5 generation to anyone who is capable of embodying multiple cultures, regardless of their age, but focus specifically on Chinese artists who came to the US after the 1980s, at the shifts of political environment in both the US and in China. Today, I will analyze how 1.5 artists are received from an institutional perspective with two exhibitions, one at the Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco and a more mainstream Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. These examples will demonstrate that the 1.5 artists are the important agents in today's contemporary cultural production. Suspended between forces of resistance and assimilation, Chinese 1.5 generation artists like Stella Zhang and Zheng Chongbin produce much as a Chinese experience as an American experience. They often find themselves in situations that, on the one hand, being Chinese presuppose an orthodox representation. On the other, their newly absorbed proposition from the hosting countries complicate their cultural authenticity and authorship in both locations. So, the 1.5 generation, by adding that 0.5 to the 1, lives on the edge of these assumptions. So what is the institutional take on their work? This is Chinese Culture Center located in San Francisco, Chinatown. In recent years, it has worked vigorously to introduce contemporary content to San Francisco as a new form of cultural production. It is here that Stella Zhang debuted her installation work, Zero Viewpoint, and I was a curator for the show. Stella Zhang left her birthplace of Beijing in 1990 at age of 25, then lived in Japan for 10 years, and now US for another 10 years. An integral part of becoming 1.5 is about that transformation, that their work often changes drastically in a way that can create a push-pull, which leads to their simultaneous inclusion and exclusion from both the familiar tradition of their homeland culture and the foreign culture of the new locations. The site-specific Zero Viewpoint exhibition is about Stella Zhang's search of the self, or in her own words, the true self. With installation work, painting, and video, she explored her concept of zero, of nothingness, and everything from Chinese Taoism, that one comes from zero, then two, then three, and all beings. From the imposing presence of oversized phalluses to flesh taking hold of the hallway ceiling that form a tunnel like a gigantic vagina and a womb, and to shapes of vulva and labia punctured with toothpick that hinted uninhabitable pain. Zero Viewpoint is a collection of body memories that demonstrates a strong notion of potent tension, but also vulnerable and defenseless. As every piece's mode and form pointing to women's sexuality and reproductivity, and the language she adopted reminds the viewers of works by Louis Bourgeois and Yayoi Kusama. With the goal to establish a space free of gravity and boundaries, Zhang used white and lightweight material to express a sense of meditative and spiritual freedom, to connect with the most fundamental core of herself. By exploring her experience and returning to the self's original face with reverse Taoism from everything back to zero, she found her personal space and regained her sense of self from cultural duality. This reductive process of deconstruction requires minimum and often abstract representation that it became necessary to lose all forms of ethnic symbology. Such culturally ambiguous but visually honest depiction introduces a displacement of perception in the audience. The exhibition received very mixed responses. While it's critically acclaimed and attracting new audiences, 2 complaints were immediately lodged against it when it opened. One from a Caucasian woman and one from a local Chinese man, both calling the Zero Viewpoint exhibition nothing Chinese and is inappropriate for Chinese Culture Center to show it. Alongside were speculations that Stella Zhang must have a traumatized past to produce such work. As a curator for the show, I witnessed a Chinese 1.5 artist navigating away from preconceived consumptions by choosing a neutral language to express a cultural rupture, and how she falls into the trap of being accused of being un-Chinese and abnormal. These rejections to her work exemplifies cultural exclusion, a discomfort, and policing against the exhibition's attempt of inclusion. However, as a curator, I also see these reactions as a form of engagement and participation. Together with the work of the 1.5 artist, they define the edge of a culture. We can also say what happened with the 1.5 generation artist at the Chinese Culture Center is a very localized experience and is not indicative of the current art world in America. For that reason, I turn your attention to the second 1.5 generation artist, that instead of rupture from tradition, Zheng Chongbin, whose work is about convergence. Trained as a Chinese traditional painter, he came to the US in 1988 at age of 27 and has transformed his expression of abstract ink painting in the past 22 years. As a 1.5 generation artist living in the United States, Zheng Chongbin's work has not caused any tension from the audience reaction per se, but he faces a very subtle and nuanced predicament. This is White Ink, Zheng Chongbin's recent painting. In this painting, one can hardly find the dominant direction and the predictable trace of brush strokes. By combining the white acrylic, which does not dissolve instantly, and the black ink, which is absorbed the moment it touches the paper, Zheng has cultivated a shared material space of simultaneous difference and proximity. Many viewers find the painting is reminiscent of Jackson Pollock's Blue Pearl. Despite the obvious abstract form in his practice, his use of medium caused the mainstream to label him always as a Chinese ink painter. Yet, artists in the Chinese ink circle often consider him to be a contemporary artist. And why is that happening? To answer this question, I want to talk about a recent exhibition called Fresh Ink, held at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts. As a well-intended project on culture production, it invited 10 Chinese artists to create works for the museum's Chinese classical painting collection. The museum's website stated that the ancient will historicize the contemporary, while the contemporary will revitalize the ancient. This is what I see as problematic existed in today's cultural production when it comes to the ethnic ownership of a medium and history. The exhibition succeeding in affirming such ownership is exactly where it failed. The Chinese artists chosen for Fresh Ink are not really the problem. Rather, it is the institutional refusal to imagine ink as a non-ethnic genre in today's environment, as well as the insistence on a historical narrative which perpetuates ink painting as a timeless and isolated form of a Chinese identity from a mainstream's perspective. This kind of perpetuation indicates an inheritance paradigm that prevents culture from circulating both ways. Such approach also pigeonholes Chinese artists into a narrow definition. It needs to be reversed to break such paradigm in a way that you don't need to be a Chinese to perpetuate the Chinese culture, including but not limited to Chinese painting or the Chinese history. And this is exactly where Zheng Chongbin faces the predicament of exclusion. As a 1.5 generation artist living in the United States for 22 years, he is doing with his convergence of two discourses of Chinese ink painting and abstract expression on an individual scale to create an in-between space of ambiguity and indeterminacy so culture can circulate and become participatory. I believe culture is more readily understood if it is participated in as a social dialogue. Geography, gender, race, art forms are a few of its many dimensions. While culture is not fixated by any of them, it is, however, bounded to its participants. This is precisely where Zheng Chongbin and Stella Zhang, as 1.5 generation artists, can be instrumental in today's institutional cultural production. They push their work to the edge of culture by convergence or by rupture, partially intentional, partially caused by their dislocation in this new country. They disrupt the perception of a unified, unchanging Chinese culture and reveal what it really is, a living intellectual phenomenon free of ethnicity and national boundary. When I look around, I ask, what is the relevance of 1.5 generation? And to whom is it relevant? We are experiencing a depolarization of the world, which allows the individual mobility, flexibility, and translatability. Subsequently, these abilities challenge the notion that the nexus of a culture only existed within national boundaries. By removing a major inhibitor to cultural circulation, the 1.5 generation artists empower others to reinterpret and converge different cultures. In this collaborative process, they redefine the idea of society itself. That is the meaning of participation in the evolution of culture, and it's crucial for institutions to recognize and engage them so that we, everyone here, can imagine and participate. Thank you.